Hello, everyone. My name is Carol. I'm the lead ACHD volunteer for Conquering CHD. I'm here with Ken, an adult living with CHD from Chicago. We will be talking about the importance of staying active and how that relates to CHD care. Hi, Ken. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Ken, before we get started, can you share with us just a little bit about yourself?
For sure. So like you said, my name is Ken Woodhouse. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I am 40 years old. I have tetralogy of Fallot, was born in 1981 and diagnosed either at birth or shortly thereafter. I turned blue at a very young age, and at the age of 8 months had my first open heart surgery for what they called a complete repair. As I grew up, my parents were very good about taking me to annual checkups, and I was very fortunate. Every year I got pretty much the same diagnosis. You're healthy, your health is staying consistent. Your pulmonary valve is still leaking. And one thing that the doctors chose not to do during my surgery as a baby, they chose not to replace my pulmonary valve. They said a lot of people are able to live with some leakage. And they said that had they replaced it as a baby, I would have needed subsequent surgeries every couple of years. So they wanted to monitor it. And growing up, the only restriction I had was football because of the direct contact with the chest, which was actually okay because I don't like football and it was a really easy out. So to me, I had no restrictions growing up. Fast forward a few years as I went away from home to college, I fell out of care. And for many years, because I was quote unquote healthy and always felt pretty normal, or what I knew was normal, I never really considered myself a heart patient. I was always aware that I had that surgery, but never remembered it. So it's not something that was always front and center. So in my teenage years, when I went off to college, I thought I was fixed. I thought everything was taken care of, and I fell out of care for over a decade. And yeah, so fast forward to adulthood, I never thought of myself as a heart patient. So I fell out of care, went about my life. And as kind of a naive young adult individual, thought I was cured, thought I was fixed, and just figured all was done and all was behind me.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting now that we try to stay away from those words, right?
Absolutely.
So let's start with what do you do right now to stay active?
So what I do right now, I'm big into cardio. So I love cycling. I'm not fast, but I love endurance rides. I got into it my first job out of college. So I was 23, 24. I was working for a small aid service organization, and one of our annual fundraisers was a 2-day bike ride. And my boss at the time was an avid cyclist, and he encouraged me to ride or to sign up for the ride and to fundraise for the organization. And in my mind, I said, no, when I say bike riding, like I ride to work or I ride for a couple miles after work, and then that's fun. And he's like, no, you can do this. And I'm like, it's 180 miles over 2 days.
Wow.
And he said, well, yeah, so you train for it. So I did, and then I kind of got the bug. And some people talk about getting the runner's high. I do run a little bit, but I run incredibly slow, and it's not something I enjoy as much. I do it a bit just to diversify activities, but cycling is my big thing, and I probably credit that first boss many years ago to sort of getting me into it and encouraging me to try something new.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said in your bio, that you were not getting the regular CHD care in your early adulthood. Can you share what happened that led you to get back into care?
Sure. So speaking of cycling, it's actually kind of ironic. I talk about how I fell out of care when I went away to college as a young adult, and just about 10 years later, I fell back into care, literally. I was on a bike ride along the lakefront in Chicago one day after work, which was actually very common for me to do. And for the longest time, I ride or have been riding with an emergency medical bracelet that just has emergency contact info, all the essentials if you're in an accident and training on your own and no one is with you. And so I was on a bike ride this one day, and I remember it was a gorgeous August day. It was the first day after a long stretch of terrible Chicago humidity that it was not horrible out. It was delightful. I was going to go for a short ride. I remember thinking I was going to come home, have a glass of wine on my deck. I didn't go home that night. I had a concussion, literally fell off my bike. I don't remember the accident to this day. And the next thing I remember was waking up in the emergency room at Northwestern Hospital downtown. The accident, I was told, took place right near Museum Campus in the near South Loop. And when I regained consciousness or regained memory, there were doctors and police officers standing at the foot of the bed, and they handed me a bag with my bike jersey, my wallet, my keys, all the stuff that I knew I had on me. And they said, "We believe this is yours." And I said, "Yeah." And then they handed me a piece of paper and they said, "Your bike is at the loading dock at the Field Museum. You can call here when you're discharged and pick it up." Okay. So I mentioned the emergency medical bracelet that I ride with. In my online profile, it mentioned my CHD. And at the time, well, I remember when I was filling that out, I remember thinking, it's not a big deal, but I should mention it just in case something happens. I believe at this point now, 10 years later, after that bike ride probably saved my life. I was fortunate. I was completely asymptomatic. I did not know anything was wrong. I still knew I had that leaking pulmonary valve, but I had it since I was born, so I didn't think there was any issue. So because of that mention in my emergency profile, they ran a couple additional tests once they knew that there wasn't brain damage and all the immediate essentials were taken care of. So I stayed overnight for observation, and they hooked me up to a heart monitor and whatever. The next night, I was getting ready to be discharged, and the attending physician comes into my room and she said, "Did you feel that?" Did I feel what?
Right.
She said, your heart monitor just registered an arrhythmia. I didn't know what that was at the time. So she explains to me a bit what it was. And in my mind, all I heard was, "Well, I'm not going home tonight." Right. Because of the congenital heart disease mentioned in my profile, they wanted to keep me for some additional observation. I was released the next night, but I was also scheduled for some follow-up tests specifically around my heart. About a month later, I had those tests. Come to find out, not only did I have increased leaking in that pulmonary valve that I hadn't been monitoring, or no one had been monitoring for the last 10 years, there was also an aneurysm in my pulmonary artery that I was completely unaware of. So it's unknown whether I've had that for many years or if that was a new development, because I wasn't staying in care. And I think because of that accident and because of that sudden realization that, you say we try to stay away from the term fixed. I mean, clearly not. I never will be. But because of that accident, I literally fell back into care that I needed. And, it was a rude awakening, but it probably saved my life longer term.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you said it's, something that you love to do, and it brought you back into ACHD care.
Yeah.
So then did you end up having to have follow-up surgery then after that because of the aneurysm and leaking?
Yep. So what I did, fortunately in Chicago at the time, and there's been some change in the landscape of ACHD doctors and the like here, but at the time there were 3 very prominent centers. So I did all the things. I had medical records forwarded to every place that would possibly have them. I had interviews and consultations with, I think, every ACHD doctor in the city who had availability in the next 6 months. And it was very interesting because the first doctor who saw me recommended short-term open heart surgery to replace that aneurysm and to replace the pulmonary valve. And then opinions 2 and 3 said, "We don't think you need it yet." They said, "We think you probably will at some point." But what the second and third opinions recommended was my pulmonary artery was very narrowed. So what they had suggested was doing a stent procedure to put a stent into the artery to open it up, because what they also discovered, and I was completely oblivious to this, was the balance of blood going from my heart to my lungs was severely out of balance. So in a perfect setup, the amount of blood going to each lung is about 50-50. In some cases, it's 40%, 60%, just depending on anatomy and individual body structure.
Right.
Mine was 20%, 80%.
Wow.
And I forget which was which, but it was because of this narrowed artery. They said what we can probably do is if we open up the artery with a stent, it'll take some of the pressure off of that aneurysm, equalize the blood flow between your lungs, and then you can probably put off the surgery for a couple more years. So I went round and around and around and around, and I'm really good at the what if game. And in my mind, I said, well, what if the one doctor is right and the other two are wrong? Or what if I get back on my bike and that aneurysm ruptures? Like, do I have like a half hour before I have to get to the OR? And like, is that it? So went through a lot of questioning and confusion and being incredibly scared and overwhelmed. But I did opt for the stent procedure first, which did all of the things it was supposed to do, and then stayed in care because I did not and have not and will not fall out of care again, no matter how great I'm feeling. But it was about 2, maybe 3 years after that accident that in one of my regular checkups, my then cardiologist, called me back and he said, I think you're at that point. He said, you're kind of in that gray area. You can go a little bit longer. He said, but you're kind of in the area where we recommend surgery because if you wait too much longer, he said there could be potentially permanent damage to the heart muscle. And that was all I needed to hear. I was like, okay, then we're scheduling it now. And because even if it's a little wonky and not beating exactly how it's supposed to, I don't want more damage done to it that
Sure.
I can avoid.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's got to put a big change in your life from going from feeling great to all of a sudden finding all this out.
And that's the strange thing, right? Because throughout all of this, it was a mental minefield, but throughout all of this, I physically felt okay. Like I never felt shortness of breath or now compared to someone who doesn't have a CHD, maybe my exercise endurance was different, but I never knew that because I've never not had a CHD. So even though I could be active, I knew what my endurance was and what my limits were, and I just hadn't noticed any difference.
Right. And then after you had that incident on your bike, was it difficult for you once you were healthy to get back on it? I mean, were you worried that any activity would be dangerous, especially with the aneurysm? And
yes, but that was more mental than physical.
Okay.
Because after my surgery, I went through all the requisite 12 weeks of cardiac rehab and was progressing, and all of the metrics that they want you to meet and the timelines, I was either meeting or exceeding. So I was incredibly fortunate. And that was great. I knew that intellectually, but there was something very, it sounds strange to say, but there's something very rewarding about having gotten back on the bike, not just at all, but for me actually to ride past the point where I knew that accident was.
Sure.
So I mentioned it was on the lakefront path. I love the lakefront path. It's one of my favorite places to ride. And even though I'd been in it a handful of times since the accident, there was something about, even though I didn't remember the accident and didn't remember the fall, there was something mentally about, I'm going to ride past museum campus and just say that I did it. And there was something, it was almost an unexplained sense of accomplishment that like, oh, I'm back.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because you kind of have that block in your mind of like, okay, I need to do this. And once you get past it, then you're like, all right, that's good. Like I can do this. Ken, you've accomplished some pretty amazing physical feats, even for someone without CHD. Can you tell us about the Camino de Santiago and what inspired you to make that trek?
I can. So very briefly, for people who are not familiar, the Camino de Santiago is a 500-mile walk across northern Spain that was historically a Christian pilgrimage. And Many people today do it for a variety of reasons. Some do it for very religious reasons. Other people do it just for a sense of adventure and the hike. Other people do it as a way to process a loss or overcome some sense of grief. So you have millions of people from all over the world doing it for a variety of reasons. 3 years before I did it, my sister and brother-in-law did the journey, and I remember following them along as they were posting photos and blogging about it. And I remember thinking to myself, like, that looks amazing. Never thinking I actually wanted to do it, but like, it looks amazing. Spain is gorgeous. They look like they're having so much fun. But why would I walk across a country? And like, how can I take a month off of work? And what? So again, fast forward a couple of years, I was living in DC at the time and was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and this idea of mid-career sabbatical or mid-career retirement kind of came up, and we were discussing about how a lot of folks in my generation, in their 30s and their 40s, and I would argue even wider ranges now, the whole idea of traditional retirement that many of our parents had is not likely anymore for financial reasons, especially when you work in the nonprofit sector, as I do. So we were having this conversation, and I started thinking about, like, what would I want to do if I did this? I was in a job that I enjoyed, but was not super passionate about. I had just finished paying off my student loans, did a lot of number crunching because I can be an Excel nerd and I own that. And this idea of hiking the Camino sort of came up to me again. At the time, I was just about 2 years post-op. I was feeling really great. So I did all the number crunching. I decided I was going to quit my job. I had all the different scenarios figured out for how long I could live if I didn't get a job for another 3, 4, 5, 6 months after this, whatever. And bought the tickets, gave notice at my job. But what was really interesting for me, because I had it all planned out, I knew the date I was leaving, I had my tickets purchased. But for me, nothing was official until I had my scheduled checkup with my cardiologist in DC. Sure. And what was interesting is at the time, I was in between cardiologists there. So there was a change in staff. And my first visit with this new to me cardiologist in DC, I walked in, he had my chart, and we did the routine clinic visit, and he looked at all my numbers and stats. And he said, things look good. He said, you look like you're doing great, 2 years after surgery, on and on. I said, cool. I said, so here's my plan in 4 months. And I explained everything, and he looked at me and he said, okay. He ran like 1 or 2 more tests. I think I had a Holter for a couple of days and maybe a stress test. I'm forgetting specifically, but he wanted to run a couple more tests just before he said, okay. And it was interesting to me how much, even though I had paid for tickets and was ready to go, like, in my mind, I needed his permission.
Sure.
But I think what inspired me to do it, so personally, I'm not religious, but knowing kind of the adventure that is this trek and the physical and mental challenge that it is, in my mind, having gone through major surgery a couple of years prior, and I think one thing that's really interesting for a lot of folks with CHD is we have a better understanding or acceptance of our mortality than a lot of folks. And I don't say that to be morbid or to be negative, but I think in some ways it allows us to actually live more while we're alive.
Absolutely.
So taking that entire backstory of mid-career retirement, mid-career sabbatical, this was something I just wanted to do. And because my doctor told me I could, and because my finances told me I could, I did. I also knew that I felt really great, but another thing with CHD is in 6 months, I might not.
Right.
So it was very much the like, have to seize the moment, and it sounds cliched, but I have absolutely no regrets. So that was a really long-winded answer to your question, but that's how I got there.
I mean, that's just amazing. That's just amazing to me. And I remember seeing some of your pictures, and
that was gorgeous. An
incredible journey. Absolutely. So since that incredible journey, like, what other goals have you set for I mean, that's a hard one to top. What other goals have you set for yourself or achieved with regards to physical activity?
Yeah, long term and long distance goals are hard because right now I don't want to quit my job and hike for 6 months because I really like, or for 6 weeks because I really like my job. Um, but what I did decide to do, kind of in parallel to life and everything, I became certified as a personal trainer through the American College of Exercise, and I did that more so as personal development and education. I don't have a desire to work in a gym. I'm not currently working with clients, but it was more so having gone through everything I've gone through, having an understanding of what my body has gone through in an operating room and what folks have done to it, and recognizing that within days or weeks or months after, I was able to run again, or I was able to cycle.
Right.
Like, the body's really amazing. So I pursued the certification. One, it's cool to say you're a personal trainer, you have letters after your name, but more so it was personal edification, and I wanted a better understanding of how the body works and how exercise benefits it regardless of your background or your health status. And it was more just an opportunity to do that. One day I may work with clients. It's not currently on my radar, but it was just kind of part of the journey of understanding everything that's going on inside me.
It's awesome. That's incredible.
Thanks.
Any other big adventures planned along as far as the, activity goes? You said you're coming up close to 10 years since all of this, since your accident.
So the only other thing right now that's on my radar is, and it's been on my radar a couple times, and life has gotten in the way, but I still want to at some point complete a triathlon.
Nice.
I don't, at the moment, have a desire to do an Ironman because that's just intense. But I would like to do it just to say that I can.
Right.
Another thing that I did, I'm backtracking a bit, but after my stent procedure, before my second open heart surgery, I ran a half marathon. And when I say ran, it was mostly jogged and walked. But for me, that was also a mental accomplishment to say, less than a year after this, I'm back.
Right.
And my goal was to cross the finish line, not doing a log roll.
Right.
And I did. So for me, it's kind of the same with the triathlon. Like, I don't care about the time. I'm going to push myself because I'm just competitive by nature, but I know I'm not a strong swimmer. I know I'm not a strong runner, and I know I'm not a fast cyclist, but I don't care. Like, it's for me to say, oh, I've been cut open twice and poked and prodded more times than I can count, but I still crossed the finish line.
Absolutely.
So it's a physical challenge, but it's also for me much more mental, and say, oh, I am strong. I can do this.
Right. Absolutely. That's awesome. With the
Sorry, Roxy got in the way.
Oh, she's fine. Has there ever been a time, it sounds like you were always pretty active, but has there ever been a time when a physical activity that you enjoyed became a challenge because of your health? If so, what did you do to overcome that?
The only thing that I can think of, and it's a long time ago, was when we were forced in high school to run the mile. What a lot of people who know me only as an adult don't know is I was a chubby kid. So until about midway through high school, I had a lot of baby fat on me, and endurance and physical activity of any sort was not really my thing. At that time when I was biking, that was literally, I was biking to school, which was 2 miles away. So I think the only thing that I remember being or feeling restricted from doing was running that mile that was required in gym class, and I hated it. And in my mind, I thought it was just because I was chunky and just didn't want to do it. But looking back, like, I wonder if it was both and. I mean, I was out of shape physically, but also, like, even now when I do run and I have completed a half marathon, my time was no great accomplishment. But I think, I mean, and that's a bit of a stretch of an example. I feel really fortunate that I don't recall more recently feeling restricted from doing something that I wanted to.
That's great. What other benefits aside from the physical would you say you've gained from staying active?
For me, absolutely, mental health. And I don't want to go too far down that road because I know there's a lot of specifics around the mental health as a practice, and I'm not a mental health professional, but I can say just from personal experience, even though I've not been diagnosed with depression or diagnosed with anxiety, I've definitely experienced bouts of mild depression and plenty of anxiety to go around. So for myself, I find when I'm more active, whether that's regularly on the bike or going for a half-hour walk after work, doing something that's away from my computer is not only physically beneficial, but just alleviates so much around depression and anxiety. And one of the great things now for people with CHD and people without CHD, there's just so much more literature about all of the benefits of any sort of physical activity. So I recognize not everyone is an endurance athlete. Not everyone likes biking, not everyone likes running, not everyone can do those. But for a lot of people, with very few exceptions, they can do something. That might be a walk around the block, that might be a stationary bike going, a couple miles an hour. So what? There's so much evidence, even for folks with chronic health issues, that some level of physical activity is better than none. And that varies for people.
Sure.
But for me, not just the physical, I can tell if I go for a couple days without any sort of physical activity because my mood is in the toilet. Anxiety is peaked, feelings of depression escalate, and it's just really not fun. I just this past weekend, I took advantage of an unexpectedly nice day and went for a bike ride, and I almost didn't because I was in a funk. I hadn't been riding for a couple days. I hadn't been active. The weather was terrible in Chicago. And I almost just sort of stayed home. And I was like, I know I'm going to have fun. I know I'm going to feel better. And it was strange, like having to force myself to get ready, to change clothes, to put air in my tires, knowing what the end result was going to be, but just getting over that mental hurdle of it's really easy. I'm not feeling well. I want to stay home. And I did a short ride and I felt amazing the rest of the day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge benefit of physical activity, especially like you said, in CHD patients who we know that there's a lot of research as to, the connection with mental health and having any type of chronic disease, but specifically as we're talking now about congenital heart defects. So what,
for sure.
And you kind of brought this up in the last question, but what advice would you give to other CHD patients looking to be more active?
A couple things. One, not directly related to your question, but be a bit of advice to anyone with CHD is don't do what I did and not be out of care for 10 plus years. And if you are, do what you can to get back and find those resources. But in terms of being active, one of the best pieces of advice I can say is, find what works for you, and talk to your ACHD doctor to find out what is appropriate for you. I feel incredibly fortunate that I can be as active as I am. I recognize that's not true for a lot of people, but if you have the permission and the guidance from your ACHD care team, try it out. Try different things. Some people excel in swimming, especially folks who can't do a lot of running or other high intensity activities. So, they find different outlets. For some people, even just walking around the block, walking a couple miles with friends, it's something. And one thing that I've discovered just for myself and with other people with and without health issues is that even just sort of getting over that, both the mental and physical barrier of doing nothing to doing something. One of the initial sort of lessons or pieces of advice that was shared when I was studying for my personal trainer exam. Before they dive into all of this is the amount of cardio you should do every week, this is the amount of strength training and all of the recommended guidelines, the basic principle that they sort of lead with is some activity is better than none. So we're going to show you how to do what is recommended and how to work with clients to get to the point of what is recommended. But if people aren't there yet, or if someone has been sedentary for weeks or months, it's not like they're going to start training the next day for a 5K.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great, Ken. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and
thank you for the
invite. Always
invite.
Inspiring to me, and we really look forward to hearing what accomplishments in the future that you do, and we will hear about this triathlon at some point. And
at some point,
you'll get. You've shown that you set goals and really do everything you can to achieve them. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.